I stared through the viewport as the Hephaestus descended into the Mariana Trench. The vast darkness outside swallowed our external lights, creating the illusion we were suspended in nothingness rather than surrounded by the crushing weight of the Pacific Ocean. A knot formed in my stomach. I'd been on dozens of deep-sea mining operations before, but something about this one felt off. Passing 20,000 feet, Donna announced from the command station. Her voice carried the same military precision it always did. Systems nominal. Pressure hull integrity at 98%. The crew worked efficiently, a result of months of training. Captain Donna Silva stood at the helm, her short black hair streaked with gray. Her fingers moved confidently across the control panel. Julian Nichols leaned over his workstation, sandy blonde hair falling over his glasses as he focused on the seabed scans. Across the cabin, Kaylee Cochran and Jerome Hudson prepared the equipment we'd need once we reached the mining site. Kaylee's dark curly hair was pulled back in its usual practical ponytail, her nimble hands organizing toolkits with methodical care. Jerome checked pressure gauges with his typical frown of concentration, occasionally pushing his rectangular glasses back up his nose. Emily Simpson monitored vital systems from her medical station, her straight black bob framing her face as she tracked our biometric readings with practiced calm. "Gordon." Donna's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Status report on the sonic array?" I turned to my own console, checking the readouts. "Sonic array is green across the board, ready to deploy on your command." The words came out steady, professional. No reason to share my unease with the others. We had a job to do. "Bottom approaching," Julian called out, not looking up from his screen. 36,200 feet. We're nearing operational depth. The Hephaestus slowed its descent, stabilizers keeping us level above the target site. The mining company had spent millions mapping this section of the trench, pinpointing mineral deposits worth the expense and risk of sending us down here. "Lights on full," Donna ordered. "Let's see what we're working with." The floodlights turned on, revealing a section of seabed filled with jagged rocks. Clouds of sediment swirled in our lights. "Holding position at operational depth," Donna confirmed. "Gordon, prepare to deploy the sonic array." I nodded and started the deployment sequence. The sonic array used sound waves to map the mineral deposits below the seafloor without drilling. The data would show us where to place our extraction equipment. My fingers moved across the touchscreen, activating the preliminary systems. The ship hummed slightly as the array extended from its housing beneath us. "Initial pulse ready," I reported, targeting mapped sector Alpha 1. "Proceed," Donna said. I tapped the command, and the first pulse fired. The ship vibrated faintly as the sound waves penetrated the seabed below us. On my screen, data began flowing in, creating a three-dimensional map of what lay beneath. Julian left his station and approached mine, tablet in hand. His face looked tight, concerned. He leaned close to me. "Gordon, I'm picking up something unusual in these readings," he said quietly, showing me his tablet. "See this area here? The density patterns suggest a void pocket approximately 200 feet beneath us. It doesn't match any of our preliminary scans." I studied the image, noting the empty space that shouldn't have been there. "Could be a natural formation. Caves exist even at these depths." "Maybe," Julian said, but he didn't sound convinced. "But the surrounding structure is unusually thin. If we hit it with full-strength pulses, we might—" "Is there a problem?" Donna asked, cutting through our conversation. Julian straightened up. "Captain, I'm detecting an anomalous void formation beneath the target site. I recommend we adjust our position and reschedule the full scan until we can better understand what we're dealing with." Donna's eyes narrowed slightly. "Show me." Julian handed her his tablet. She glanced at it for barely 5 seconds before handing it back. "Noted, but we're maintaining our schedule," she said firmly. "The company expects results from this expedition. We're not delaying based on what might be a simple cave system." "But Captain," Julian started. "That's my decision, Mr. Nichols." The edge in her voice made it clear the discussion was over. She turned to me. "Gordon, proceed with the second pulse. Full power." Julian shot me a worried look before returning to his station. I hesitated, glancing at the void on my own screen. Something didn't feel right. "Gordon," Donna repeated. "Second pulse." I took a breath and entered the commands. Second pulse initiating. Power at 100%. The array beneath us charged and fired. The vibration shook the equipment in the cabinets. Coffee spilled from Jerome's mug onto the floor. Then came the sound. A low, metallic groan that seemed to come from the very bones of the ship. Not normal. Not at all. "What was that?" Kaylee asked, her voice tight with concern. "Pressure hull feedback," I answered automatically, but I wasn't sure. The sound continued, building in intensity. "Captain," Emily called out suddenly, "look at viewport 3. We all turned to see a thin fracture spreading across the reinforced glass of the smaller viewport. Not catastrophic yet, but deeply concerning at this depth. "Abort the sequence," Donna shouted. "Gordon, shut it down now." My fingers flew across the controls, inputting the emergency stop codes. "Shutting down, retracting array." But the system lagged, the screen freezing momentarily. "Come on," I muttered, feeling sweat break out on my forehead. The controls finally responded, but not before a final pulse escaped from the array. Stronger than the previous ones, like a sonic boom directed straight down into the seabed. The ship shuddered violently. Tools clattered to the floor. Alarm lights flashed as systems registered the stress. Then everything went still. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. "Status report," Donna demanded, her voice unnaturally calm. "Hull integrity holding at 94%, Emily reported. "Viewport fracture is stable, not progressing." "Array is powered down and retracted," I added, checking my systems. Julian was staring at his screen, face pale. "Captain, I'm detecting movement." "Movement?" Donna asked sharply. "What kind of movement?" "I don't know," Julian answered. "Something's shifting through the fractures we just created in the seabed. Multiple points of disruption." Before anyone could respond, the lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed us whole, a darkness so complete, it felt like we'd been erased from existence. Several long seconds passed before the emergency systems kicked in. Red backup lights flickered on, casting everything in a bloody glow. "Emergency power engaged," Emily announced. "Main system reboot in progress." In that dim red light, I looked down at the floor, trying to get my bearings, and froze. My shadow, lit by the emergency lights, didn't look right. Instead of matching my stance, it stretched toward the viewport that faced the broken seabed below, as if reaching for something. I blinked hard, and in that instant, the shadow snapped back to normal, once again a perfect match to my posture. "Did anyone else?" I started to ask, then stopped myself. No one was looking at the floor. They were all busy with the emergency protocols, checking systems, restoring power. A chill ran through me. What I'd seen wasn't possible. Shadows didn't move on their own. Yet I knew what I'd seen, and the memory of that movement left me shaken. "Main power coming back online," Kaylee called out. The regular lights flickered back to life, but the sense of wrongness remained. As the others worked to stabilize our systems and assess the damage, I couldn't stop glancing down at my shadow, now behaving exactly as it should. Had I imagined it? Maybe. But as I turned back to my console, the certainty grew that something had changed in those moments of darkness. Something had found us, or I had found it. I spent 12 hours straight in the engine compartment, working alone on repairs after the sonic pulse incident. The backup generators were still struggling to maintain consistent power, which meant I had to fix the primary power couplings before we could fully restore normal operations. My back ached from being hunched over in the cramped space, but someone had to do it, and Donna had made it clear this was my responsibility since I was the one who'd fired that second pulse. I reached for the socket wrench I'd placed on the ledge above my head. As I stretched my arm up, I caught something in my peripheral vision that made me freeze. My shadow on the bulkhead wall moved a split second after my actual movement, like it was lagging behind. I blinked hard and stared at it. "What the hell?" I muttered, waving my hand slowly. The shadow followed, but with that same slight delay. I did it again, faster this time. And for a moment I could swear there were two shadows, one moving with me and one catching up microseconds later. I rubbed my eyes. The emergency lighting down here was unreliable at best, creating weird strobing effects as the backup system cycled. That had to be it. That and the fact that I'd been working without a break since before the others had gone to sleep. My eyes were playing tricks, my brain was fried, and the irregular lighting was making everything look strange. I finished tightening the last coupling and packed up my tools. The repairs weren't perfect, but they'd hold until we reached the surface. That couldn't come soon enough. I'd never felt claustrophobic in submarines before, but now the walls of the Hephaestus seemed to press in from all sides. The knowledge of 36,000 feet of crushing ocean above us, suddenly much more present in my mind. Back in my quarters, I dropped my toolkit on the floor and peeled off my sweat-soaked coveralls. My small cabin was the only place on the ship where I could get any real privacy, though even these accommodations were minimal, just enough room for a narrow bunk, a desk bolted to the wall, and a tiny bathroom unit. I stepped into the bathroom to wash my face. The cold water felt good against my skin, washing away some of the grime and exhaustion. As I straightened up, water dripping from my chin, I felt an unusual chill run through the room, like someone had opened a freezer door right behind me. I looked up at the mirror and froze. For just a second, I thought I saw something dark move behind my reflection. Not my shadow, but something else. Something with depth and purpose. I spun around, heart racing, but the tiny bathroom was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, everything looked normal. "Get it together," I told my reflection, noting the dark circles under my eyes and the strain evident in my face. I dried off and collapsed onto my bunk, not even bothering to get under the covers. Sleep came quickly but brought no rest. My dreams were filled with darkness, not the familiar darkness of the ocean depths, but something ancient and aware. In my dreams, my shadow watched me from walls and floors, stretching and contracting with a life of its own. I felt observed, studied by something that had been sleeping for eons until our sonic pulses had awakened it. I woke feeling worse than when I'd gone to bed. My shirt was damp with sweat, and my heart was racing like I'd been running instead of sleeping. The ship's clock told me it was morning, at least according to our artificial schedule down here where no sunlight ever reached. I made my way to the mess hall, hoping coffee might bring me back to some semblance of normality. Julian and Kaylee were already there, huddled over a tablet, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when I walked in. "Morning?" I said, ignoring their obvious discomfort. Julian nodded stiffly but didn't say anything. Kaylee gave a weak smile and quickly looked away. I poured myself coffee and sat at the far end of the table, trying not to take their behavior personally. We were all on edge after what had happened. I was halfway through my coffee when Jerome stormed in. His face was flushed, his movements jerky with barely contained anger. He marched straight to my table and slammed his hands down on the surface, making my coffee slosh over the rim of the mug. "I found the logs, Green," he said, his voice low but intense. "You altered the calibration settings on the sonic array before the pulse." I set my cup down carefully. "That's standard procedure, Jerome. The array needed to be tuned to the specific density readings we were getting." "Bullshit," he spat. "You pushed it way beyond safety parameters. Those adjustments weren't in the protocol." Julian and Kaylee were watching now, their earlier conversation forgotten. I was conscious of their eyes on us and of how this looked. Jerome was technically right. I had pushed the calibration, but only because Donna had insisted we get results. "Look," I said, keeping my voice level. "I was following orders. Take it up with Donna if you have a problem." "Orders?" Jerome's voice rose. "You're the technical specialist. You knew what could happen if you overloaded those systems. And now we've got a cracked viewport, compromised hull integrity, and something moving out there in the sediment." I stood up, not liking how he was looming over me. "I don't know what you think you saw. I saw the readings." He cut me off. "Something shifted when that last pulse hit. Something big. And it's your fault." Jerome moved around the table toward me, getting in my face. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath and see the blood vessels standing out in his eyes from lack of sleep. "You need to back off," I warned. Instead, he grabbed the front of my coveralls and shoved me backward until my shoulders hit the wall. "You've endangered this entire crew with your recklessness." I didn't push back. I didn't have to. As Jerome had me pinned against the wall, my eyes dropped to the floor, and what I saw made my blood run cold. My shadow was stretching, elongating across the floor in a way that didn't match my position or the light sources in the room. It seemed to be reaching toward Jerome, its edges rippling like liquid. "Jerome," I whispered, unable to take my eyes off the shadow. "Don't try to change the subject," he snarled, his grip tightening on my coveralls. "Look down," I managed, but he was too angry to listen. The shadow continued to distort, stretching up the wall behind Jerome like it was being pulled by invisible strings. Above us, the overhead light fixture, a heavy metal housing containing the mess hall's main fluorescent panel, began to vibrate. The screws holding it in place started to turn, backing out of their sockets one by one. "Jerome!" I yelled, trying to push him away. He misunderstood my intention and slammed me harder against the wall. "You think I'm afraid of you?" The light fixture broke free with a screech of metal. Jerome must have heard it, because he looked up just as 200 pounds of metal and glass crashed down onto his head. There was a sickening crack, and Jerome crumpled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Kaylee screamed, and we all snapped into action. "Get Emily!" I shouted, dropping to my knees beside Jerome. Blood pooled around his head, spreading across the metal floor plates. I checked for a pulse, but couldn't find one. Julian ran from the room, presumably to get Emily. Kaylee stood frozen, her hands over her mouth. I looked down at my shadow, which had returned to normal, lying flat against the floor exactly where it should be. Emily arrived within minutes, medical bag in hand, but it was already too late. After checking his vitals and attempting resuscitation, she sat back on her heels and shook her head. "He's gone," she said quietly. It wasn't long before Donna arrived, taking in the scene with a cold, analytical gaze. "What happened here?" she demanded. "The light fixture fell," I explained, gesturing to the twisted metal on the floor. "It must have been damaged during the power fluctuations yesterday. Jerome and I were—" I hesitated, not wanting to admit we'd been arguing. "We were talking, and it just came down." Donna looked from the fixture to the ceiling, then to Jerome's body, and finally to me. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "A tragic accident," she said, but her tone made it clear she wasn't convinced. "Emily, prepare the body for cold storage. Kaylee, Julian, clean this up." She turned her attention fully to me. "Green, I want you to stay away from all critical systems until we surface. No engine work, no systems maintenance, no communications. Is that clear?" "Captain, the repairs aren't finished," I protested. "Kaylee will handle them. You're confined to non-essential areas of the ship." Her voice was hard, leaving no room for argument. "We've had too many accidents since your sonic pulse. I'm not taking any more chances." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the memory of my shadow stretching toward Jerome seconds before the light fell kept me silent. I nodded my agreement, and Donna turned away to help Emily with Jerome's body. As the others worked, I stood aside, watching them. Julian wouldn't meet my eyes, and Kaylee kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, suspicion, or maybe both. I looked down at my shadow again, perfectly normal now, just an ordinary silhouette cast by the emergency lights. But I knew what I'd seen, and I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, Jerome had been right about something awakening in the depths. I went back to my quarters that night, locking the door behind me. The events of the day, Jerome's death, Donna's suspicions, the crew's fear, weighed on me like lead. I couldn't deny what was happening anymore. Something wasn't right, and it was connected to me. I stood in my small room, staring at my shadow on the wall from the overhead light. It looked normal, but I'd seen it move. I'd seen it reach. "Is something there?" I whispered, feeling ridiculous talking to my own shadow. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, without me moving a muscle, the shadow rippled, a subtle undulation that ran from its feet to its head. I held my breath, frozen in place. "What are you?" I asked, voice barely audible. The shadow shifted again, stretching slightly taller against the wall. I hadn't moved, not an inch. I backed away until I hit my bunk and sat down hard. The shadow followed me normally, then rippled once more when I stopped moving. This wasn't lack of sleep. This wasn't stress or guilt over Jerome. Something had attached itself to me. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake, watching my shadow on the wall, trying to make sense of what was happening. Whenever I felt fear or anxiety, it stirred, becoming more defined against the wall. When I forced myself to breathe slowly, it settled into a normal shape. By morning, I'd convinced myself I needed to monitor the situation before telling anyone. If I started talking about living shadows, I'd be sedated and confined to the infirmary before I could finish the sentence. The next day passed without incident. I worked my assigned tasks, keeping to myself, watching my shadow from the corner of my eye. Nothing unusual happened. Until the following morning. I was in the mess hall when Kaylee rushed in, face pale. "Julian's down. Something happened in the equipment room." My coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering on the floor as I ran after her. We found Julian sprawled next to the sonic array control panel. His body was rigid, eyes wide open, a look of surprise frozen on his face. The smell of burned flesh hung in the air. Emily was already there, checking for vital signs. but I could tell from her expression it was too late. "He was electrocuted," Emily said, looking up at us. "The panel must have shorted when he was working on it." Donna joined us, surveying the scene with hard eyes that eventually landed on me. "2 crew members dead in 3 days," she said. "This is beyond coincidence." "The equipment's old," I said weakly. "We pushed it too hard with those pulses." "Maybe," Donna said, but I could tell she didn't believe it. Later, alone in my quarters, I watched my shadow on the wall. It looked darker and sharper than usual under the dim light. "Did you do that to Julian?" I asked it. The shadow rippled in what almost looked like satisfaction. I thought back to Julian's behavior after Jerome's death, the suspicious glances, the whispered conversations with Kaylee that stopped when I entered a room. Had my shadow interpreted that as a threat? The thought made me sick. The next day, Donna said she would check the hull where the viewport had cracked, using one of the submersible's maintenance suits. I watched her prepare, checking her oxygen supply with Kaylee's help. "I'll monitor your vitals from here," Kaylee told her, adjusting something on Donna's suit. I stayed back, pretending to check systems at a nearby console, but really watching my shadow. It stretched slightly toward Donna when she glanced at me with suspicion. 30 minutes into her inspection, the emergency alarm blared through the ship. Kaylee's voice came over the comms, high with panic. "Oxygen malfunction in the external suit. Captain's levels are dropping." I raced to the monitoring station with Emily. Kaylee was frantically trying to reroute oxygen to Donna's suit. "The primary tank just failed," Kaylee explained, fingers flying over the controls. "I'm switching to backup, but it's not responding correctly." Through the external cameras, we could see Donna struggling, her movements becoming sluggish as she tried to make it back to the airlock. "I'm going out," Kaylee said, already moving toward the second suit. "Wait," I called after her. It could be dangerous, but Kaylee was already climbing into the suit, determination written across her face. I watched the external feed as she made her way to Donna, who had collapsed against the hull. Kaylee grabbed her and pulled her toward the airlock with desperate strength. When they finally came through, Donna was blue-lipped and barely conscious. Emily administered emergency oxygen while Kaylee explained what happened. "Her main tank was fine when we checked it," she said, looking at me. "Then it just failed. The connection valve looked like it had been twisted shut." That night, back in my quarters, I faced the truth I'd been avoiding. 3 incidents. 3 crew members who had confronted or suspected me. It wasn't coincidence. "You're trying to protect me," I said to my shadow. "You think they're threats." The shadow stretched along the wall, confirming my suspicion. I tried a test, thinking about Donna accusing me after Jerome's death. Immediately, the shadow darkened and reached toward the door. When I deliberately calmed myself and thought neutral thoughts about helping the crew, the shadow settled back into a more normal shape. "You can't keep hurting people," I told it. "I need to stay away from them." The next morning, I told Donna I needed to work alone on repairing systems in the lower levels. She agreed, still weak from her near-death experience, and probably relieved to have me away from the others. Isolation stirred something within me. While I worked in the engine compartment, tools vibrated around me. A pipe burst, sending a jet of scalding steam that narrowly missed my face. Lights flickered, and electrical systems sparked. "Stop it," I hissed at my shadow. "You're making things worse." The shadow moved across the floor, shifting with my rising anxiety. It mirrored my fear and instinct to protect myself. I spent that night watching it move across my walls while I remained perfectly still. Sometimes it would take on a slightly different shape than my own, the edges blurring and reshaping. I noticed how it reacted to my emotions. When I thought about the crew's suspicions, it stretched toward the door. When I deliberately focused on calming thoughts, it retreated to a more normal position. By the third day, paranoia had taken hold completely. I jumped at every sound. I watched the remaining crew members from a distance, terrified of what might happen if I felt threatened around them. When Emily tried to approach me about running some tests, I made an excuse and hurried away, watching my shadow stretch toward her until I rounded a corner. I can't be near them, I muttered to myself in an empty corridor. I can't risk it. That evening, I took my meals alone and volunteered for the night shift, when I knew I'd have minimal contact with others. Donna watched me with suspicious eyes but agreed, probably figuring it was better to have me working when fewer people were around. As I sat alone in the dimly lit control room, I stared at my shadow on the console. "What am I going to do with you?" I whispered. The shadow rippled slightly, as if considering the question itself. I stared at Emily across the infirmary, my mouth suddenly dry. After days of isolation, watching my shadow stretch and writhe with a life of its own, I'd made the decision I'd been avoiding. "You're going to think I'm losing my mind," I said, pacing in front of the exam table. Emily set down her tablet, giving me her full attention. "Gordon, whatever it is, just tell me. I'm a doctor, not a judge. It's about..." I stopped, realizing how insane it would sound. My shadow, there's something wrong with it. It moves when I don't. I expected her to laugh or look concerned about my mental state. Instead, she tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Show me." I nodded, moving to stand where the overhead light cast my shadow clearly on the white wall. For a moment, nothing happened. The shadow just mimicked my movements as it should. "Come on," I whispered, thinking about Jerome's death, about Julian's lifeless body. The familiar anger and fear bubbled up inside me. My shadow rippled, then stretched several inches taller than it should have been. Emily's eyes widened. I raised my right hand, but my shadow raised its left, creating a mirror image instead of a true shadow. "My God," Emily whispered, taking a step back. "How long has this been happening?" "Since the sonic pulse. Since the viewport cracked. It started small, just little movements I thought I was imagining. But after Jerome died, I trailed off, watching as my shadow rippled again at the mention of Jerome." Emily grabbed her tablet, eyes still fixed on my shadow. "I need to run some tests, right now." She worked methodically, first drawing several vials of blood, then hooking me up to the brain scanner. I sat still as the machine hummed around my head, the neural mapping program building a three-dimensional model of my brain activity. "There are unusual patterns here," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Activity in areas that shouldn't be communicating with each other." I tried to stay calm, but my heart pounded against my ribs. "What does that mean?" "It means something is affecting your neurological patterns." She turned the screen so I could see multicolored sections of what I assumed was my brain. "These connections here, they're not typical for a human brain, and there's a foreign substance in your bloodstream that wasn't present during your pre-mission screening." My mouth went dry. "Foreign substance? Like what? A parasite?" Emily shook her head. "I can't identify it. The molecular structure doesn't match anything in our database." She hesitated. "Gordon, I think whatever that sonic pulse disturbed down there, I think it found a way into you." I looked at my shadow, which had settled into a normal shape for the moment. "Can you remove it?" She chewed her lip, thinking. "I have a theory." The shadow seems to respond to your emotional state, suggesting it's bonded to your consciousness rather than just your physical body. She moved to a cabinet, pulling out a vial. I think we should try sedating you. If we can temporarily shut down your conscious mind, we might be able to separate you from the entity. And if we can't? One problem at a time, she said, filling a syringe with clear liquid. Let me get the restraints ready first, just in case something unexpected happens when you're under. I nodded, watching as she prepared the infirmary bed with padded restraints. The weight of everything crashed down on me. Jerome's death, Julian's electrocution, Donna's near suffocation, all connected to this thing inside me. This thing I'd been protecting. Emily was securing the last restraint when the infirmary door flew open. Kaylee burst in, her face flushed, breathing hard. Gordon, thank God you're here. She stopped, taking in the restraints, the syringe in Emily's hand. What's going on? Emily's trying to help me, I said. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. It's Donna. Kaylee glanced over her shoulder, lowering her voice. She's locked down the ship. All compartments, all exits. She's convinced you killed Jerome and Julian. My stomach dropped. What? She's in the weapons locker right now, Kaylee continued. She's arming herself, Gordon. She told me to stay in my quarters, but I slipped out when she went to check the engine room. I felt a cold wave of panic rising in my chest. The shadow beneath my feet began to writhe, stretching toward the door like an animal sensing prey. No! I shouted, staring down at it. Stop killing people. Stop it. Emily backed away, her eyes fixed on the floor where my shadow twisted and contorted, no longer remotely human-shaped. Gordon, you need to control it. Your emotional state is feeding it. I tried to calm myself, but the panic was overwhelming. A metal tray next to Emily began to rattle. Then a stethoscope rose from the counter, hovering in midair. One by one, medical instruments lifted around us. Scalpels, forceps, even the heavy diagnostic scanner rose several inches off its stand. Oh my God, Kaylee whispered, backing against the wall. Emily stared at the floating instruments, then at my shadow, which now covered nearly half the floor. Gordon, she said, her voice shaking but determined. We need to sedate you now, before this gets worse. I nodded, watching in horror as more objects began to rise around us, responding to my fear like an invisible tide. I struggled to control my breathing as Emily pushed the needle into my arm. The cold rush of the sedative hit my bloodstream, and my limbs grew heavy against the restraints. Through increasingly blurry vision, I watched my shadow creep up the wall, no longer flat but growing outward, forming a three-dimensional silhouette of myself. It peeled away from the surface, becoming something solid and separate. Emily, it's... My words slurred as the medication took hold. The shadow figure loomed taller, darker than anything I'd ever seen. Kaylee's scream pierced through the fog settling over my mind. It was high and sharp, filled with raw terror. Get back, Emily shouted, her voice already sounding distant. Darkness closed in from the edges of my vision, the shadow being the last thing I saw before consciousness slipped away. I didn't black out completely. I drifted in a fog, aware but disconnected. I sensed the cold metal walls of the Hephaestus, the narrow corridors, the control room. I wasn't seeing these places through my eyes. I was seeing them through something that moved like smoke through the ship. My shadow. I was inside it. Or it was inside me. The boundaries blurred. I felt its movements, hunting through the ship. It passed through the mess hall, the engine room, pausing at each doorway as if searching, Not random, purposeful. It was looking for threats, protecting me while I lay vulnerable. A foreign presence pushed against my mind. Not words, but raw impressions flooded my consciousness. Images came in flashes. Darkness with weight, pressure from miles of rock. Stillness that stretched for ages. The entity had been sleeping deep within the Earth's crust, beneath the ocean floor. It had been there since before humans walked the Earth. The sonic pulses from our array had shattered its prison. The frequencies tore apart the rock, waking it from dormancy. I saw the cracks spread through the stone and felt the entity's confusion as it was pulled upward by the retreating waves of energy, drawn to their source. To us. To me. I understood now. It had latched onto the first mind it found. Mine. Not out of malice, but instinct. It needed a host to survive in this new environment, so different from its ancient home. Its drives were simple, almost animal-like. Survive. Protect what sustains you. Consume what threatens you. Every time Jerome had confronted me, every suspicious glance from Donna, Julian's fear, the entity had perceived them all as threats to its continued existence. To me, it didn't understand human interaction, only danger and safety. With effort, I pushed back against its consciousness. I tried to form boundaries, not with words, but with concepts, images. I showed it Jerome's death, Julian's body, projected the wrongness of killing. I tried to convey that protection didn't require destruction. The response was clear, a pulling back, a curiosity, a hesitant acceptance. It didn't fully understand, but it was trying. The sedative began to fade. My thoughts became clearer, more my own again. The connection to the entity weakened as my ordinary consciousness reasserted itself. My eyelids felt heavy, but I forced them open. The infirmary lights seemed too bright after the darkness I'd experienced. My mouth was dry and my head pounded with a dull ache. As awareness returned, I noticed the silence first. No equipment humming, no voices, nothing but my own breathing. I turned my head slightly, my neck stiff from being immobile. Something dark stained the floor near the door. The restraints on my wrists were loose, as if they'd been unfastened and hastily replaced. With growing horror, I realized Emily and Kaylee were nowhere to be seen. My shadow lay flat beneath me, normal again, but I could feel its satisfaction like a weight in my chest. Something terrible had happened while I was under. Something I couldn't remember, but somehow knew. I woke up with my arms and legs strapped to the metal infirmary bed. The restraints dug into my wrists and my head throbbed. As my vision cleared, I saw Donna standing over me, gripping a harpoon gun. Her face was a mess. A deep cut ran across her left cheek, blood crusted around it. Her right eye was swollen shut, the skin around it bruised. "You're finally awake," she said, her voice flat and hollow. I tried to pull against the restraints, but they held firm. My throat felt like sandpaper when I tried to speak. "Donna, what happened?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tightened her grip on the harpoon gun. That's when I saw Emily on the floor near the medicine cabinet, motionless. Her right arm was bent awkwardly, and blood pooled beneath her head. "Is she still breathing?" Donna cut me off. "Unlike Kaylee." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. "What? Your little friend killed her." Donna's face contorted with grief and rage. "Whatever you brought aboard this ship when we cracked open that seabed, I saw it with my own eyes. That thing that's attached to you. It threw her against the wall like she was nothing." My mind raced as fragments of memory started coming back. The sedative Emily had given me. The shadow separating from me. the feeling of the entity moving through the ship while I lay helpless. I didn't mean for any of this. "Shut up," Donna shouted, raising the harpoon gun higher. "You think I care what you meant? Jerome, Julian, now Kaylee. Half my crew is dead because of what you brought aboard." I glanced frantically around the room, looking for my shadow. It was there, stretching from my body across the floor, appearing normal at first glance. But as I watched, I noticed a subtle rippling along its edges. "I'm putting an end to this," Donna said, aiming the harpoon directly at my chest. "Before we all die." "Donna, wait. We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. That thing is connected to you. You die, maybe it dies too." As she spoke, I watched in horror as my shadow began to pull away from my body. It moved like ink through water, detaching completely from my feet and sliding across the floor. The darkness gathered and rose up behind Donna, forming into a humanoid shape, a three-dimensional silhouette with no features except a general human form. "Behind you!" I screamed. "Donna, behind you!" She started to turn, but too slow. The shadow entity surged forward, engulfing her from behind. I couldn't look away as Donna's body went rigid, her back arching at an impossible angle. The harpoon gun wobbled in her grip as her fingers twisted and contorted. Her eyes bulged with terror as her joints bent backward, bones making audible cracking sounds. "Stop it," I shouted at the shadow. "Let her go." Donna's arm jerked violently, her finger squeezing the trigger of the harpoon gun. The weapon discharged with a metallic thunk, the harpoon missing me by inches and slamming into the hull beside my head. The impact reverberated through the metal wall, followed by a hissing sound as water began to spray through the breach. Red emergency lights flashed, filling the room with a crimson glow. Alarms blared, their sound echoing through the ship. The water spray turned from a thin jet to a powerful stream, soaking the nearest equipment. The shadow entity released Donna. Her body crumpled to the floor like a discarded puppet, limbs splayed at unnatural angles. She didn't move. The entity, now fully formed and separate from me, turned in my direction. It had no eyes, but I felt its attention shift toward me. I pulled desperately at my restraints. "Stay back, I helped you." The entity moved closer, sliding across the floor in a way that defied physics. Water passed through it without effect, as the spray from the hull breach grew stronger. The realization hit me with terrible clarity. It wasn't protecting me anymore. It never had been. The entity had been eliminating threats to itself, using me as a host, a connection to this world. Now, as it towered over my restrained body, I understood with growing dread that everyone on the ship, including me, was just food for it to consume. It had never been my shadow at all. I had just been the first thing it found when it woke from the deep. I twisted my right wrist against the restraint, feeling the padding give slightly where the shadow entity had previously loosened it. The leather strap slid just enough for me to work my hand free. Water continued to spray from the hull breach where Donna's harpoon had struck, and alarms blared throughout the ship. I stretched my arm toward the medical tray next to the bed, fingers straining to reach the instruments that had scattered during the chaos. My fingertips brushed against cold metal. I extended my reach further, shoulder muscles burning with the effort, until I managed to grasp the handle of a surgical scalpel. The blade gleamed under the emergency lights as I brought it to my own throat, pressing the sharp edge against my skin. "Stop!" I shouted at the towering shadow that loomed over me. "You need me alive. You want a host? Well, you can't have one if I'm dead." The entity froze, its form shifting. I sensed a presence pressing against my mind, confusion, alarm, a raw fear. "That's right," I said, keeping the scalpel firmly against my throat. "You need me. We both know it." The shadow pulled back slightly, its shape blurring as it lingered near the foot of the bed. I realized this thing wasn't evil. It wasn't killing out of malice. It was acting on instinct, trying to protect itself in an unfamiliar environment. It had been trapped for who knows how long until our sonic pulses freed it. It had latched onto me because it needed a host to survive, seeing any threat to me as a threat to itself. "Listen to me," I said, easing the pressure of the blade slightly but keeping it in position. "I understand now. You're just trying to survive. So am I. So was everyone else on this ship." The shadow pulsed, and I felt impressions forming in my mind, not words, but concepts. Darkness, safety, host, threat, protect. "We can coexist," I told it, my voice growing steadier as understanding solidified between us. "But no more killing, no more hurting people. That has to stop. Right now." The entity wavered, its form shifting. I sensed its assessment of my proposal. Water sprayed from the breach, pooling on the floor and soaking my clothes. The ship's alarms blared in the background as we negotiated. "I'll help you survive," I promised. "But you have to help me too. We do this together or not at all." After what seemed like an eternity, the shadow began to shrink. Slowly, deliberately, it flowed across the floor like spilled oil, moving beneath the bed and then underneath my body. It settled into place, becoming once again a normal shadow cast by my form against the bed and floor. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and lowered the scalpel. Using it, I cut through the remaining restraints on my left wrist and both ankles. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feet splashing in the inch of water that now covered the floor. I moved to Emily first, kneeling beside her. Her right arm was bent at an unnatural angle, and blood matted her hair, but I could see her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I gently shook her shoulder with my left hand. "Emily," I said. "Emily, wake up. We need to move. The ship is taking on water." Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Confusion clouded her gaze before sharpening into focus, and then fear. "The shadow," she began. "It's under control," I cut in. "For now. But we have a hull breach to deal with." Emily's medical training kicked in despite her injuries. She pushed herself up with her good arm, grimacing in pain. "My arm is broken," she stated matter-of-factly, "and I likely have a concussion." "Can you walk?" She nodded, and I helped her to her feet. We both glanced at Donna's crumpled form on the floor. Emily knelt to check her pulse, then shook her head. No words were needed. "Emergency patches," Emily said, nodding toward a cabinet near the door. "We need to seal that breach before we lose too much pressure integrity." I waded through the rising water to the cabinet and pulled out the emergency hull repair kit. Inside were several patches of different sizes, made of a specialized polymer designed to seal against the immense pressure of the deep ocean. I selected a medium-sized patch and turned back to the breach. The spray had weakened somewhat as the external pressure equalized partially with the water now in the room, but it was still coming in steadily. I positioned the patch over the hole, pressing it firmly against the metal. The polymer activated on contact with the hull material, creating an instant bond. The spray reduced to a trickle, then stopped completely as the patch sealed completely. "We need to get to the control room," I said, turning back to Emily. "Can you make it?" She nodded again, cradling her broken arm against her chest. "I'll need to stabilize this first." I helped her fashion a makeshift splint and sling from medical supplies in the infirmary. While she worked, I checked the ship's intercom system. "Attention, Hephaestus crew," I announced, knowing there would be no response. "This is Gordon Green. If anyone can hear this, meet us in the control room immediately." Only silence answered me. confirming what we already knew. Emily and I were the only survivors. We made our way through the corridors of the ship, stepping carefully over pooled water and around fallen equipment. The Hephaestus groaned around us, the hull straining against the pressure of the deep. When we reached the control room, I immediately went to the navigation console. "We need to surface," I said, inputting commands. "The ship's damaged, but the ballast system should still work." Emily slid into a seat at the system's monitoring station, wincing as she jostled her injured arm. "Hull integrity at 78%, she reported. "Multiple minor breaches on the lower decks, but the automatic seals are holding for now. Life support systems functional, but stressed." I activated the emergency ascent protocol, and the ship shuddered as the ballast tanks began to expel water. Slowly, the depth gauge began to tick upward as we started our climb toward the surface. "It'll take time," I said. "We're at extreme depth. Even with emergency protocols, it'll be hours before we reach rescue depth." Emily nodded, her face pale from pain and exhaustion. "What happened down there, Gordon?" "With the shadow." I considered how to answer, feeling the entity's presence beneath me, quiet but attentive. "We reached an understanding," I said finally. "It's not human, Emily. It doesn't think like we do, but it's intelligent enough to learn, to adapt." "It killed 3 people," she said, her voice flat. "It was protecting me," I replied, though the words sounded hollow even to me. "It saw threats where there weren't any. But I think it understands now." We fell silent, both too drained to talk. Hours passed as the Hephaestus climbed. As we neared the upper layers of the ocean, I felt a discomfort. Not mine, but from the entity. It resisted, wary of what was ahead. Light, sunlight filtering through the water, growing stronger as we neared the surface. I looked down at my shadow on the floor, noticing how it seemed to darken, to press closer to me, as if seeking shelter. "It's okay," I whispered, too quietly for Emily to hear from across the room. "There will be darkness soon enough." The entity's discomfort grew as we ascended, but it stayed beneath me. I understood that this would be our life now, a balance between its needs and mine, between darkness and light. When we finally broke the surface, the emergency transponder activated automatically, broadcasting our distress signal. Within an hour, the radar picked up approaching vessels, rescue ships responding to our SOS. As their signals grew stronger on our screens, I felt the shadow stir anxiously beneath me. Its edges rippled slightly, and impressions of alarm pushed into my mind. "They're coming to help us," I whispered, glancing over to make sure Emily was still focused on the systems panel. "But they can never know about you, about us. You understand? Stay hidden. Stay calm." The shadow remained, ready to protect us if needed. I realized I had gained a guardian, but at a terrible cost. Jerome, Julian, Kaylee, Donna, all dead because of what I had brought back. I would have to live with that guilt. "Rescue ships approaching," Emily announced, her voice betraying relief despite her clinical tone. "ETA 10 minutes. I nodded, watching the radar blips draw closer. "They'll help us," I said, speaking both to Emily and to the shadow beneath me. "But they can never know the truth about what happened down there." I sat in my apartment, reviewing the official report that classified the Hephaestus incident as catastrophic equipment failure. 3 months had passed since that day we broke the surface, since Emily and I were the only ones pulled from that steel coffin. 3 months of nightmares, settlements, and silence. The report was a masterpiece of corporate sanitization. No mention of Jerome's crushed skull from the fallen light fixture. Nothing about Julian's electrocution at the control panel. Not a word about Kaylee or Donna. just pages of technical jargon about structural integrity, pressure tolerances, and maintenance oversights. I tossed the papers onto my coffee table and rubbed my eyes. The Oceanic Mining Corporation had paid us enough to never work again, provided we signed agreements that made sure we'd never speak about what really happened. Emily took her money and moved across the country. I hadn't heard from her since the debriefing. Smart woman. My living room was dim, with only a small lamp in the corner providing light. I preferred it this way now. Bright lights made my companion restless. As if on cue, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. My shadow on the wall didn't match my seated position. Instead, it stretched, testing the boundaries of its shape before settling back. I wasn't alarmed anymore. This had become our routine. They really covered it all up, I said to the empty room, knowing I wasn't really alone. Not a single mention of you anywhere. The shadow didn't respond with words. It never did. But I felt a flutter of something like satisfaction brush against my consciousness. Over these months, I'd grown accustomed to these alien emotions that weren't my own, these impressions that came from elsewhere. I stood and walked to the bathroom, flipping on the light. In the mirror, my reflection showed the toll of the past months. My face looked older, the circles under my eyes darker. But what caught my attention was the movement behind me. In the mirror, my shadow moved differently, stretching along the wall when I was perfectly still. I'd learned not to react with fear. Fear made it agitated. "We need milk," I said, checking my watch. 9:30 in the evening. Good time for a walk. I'd established a new routine. Days were for staying in, working remotely when I needed money, watching old movies, reading. Nights were for going out. The darkness made my companion content, and when it was content, it stayed manageable. I pulled on a jacket and headed out. The night air was cool against my face. Street lamps created pools of light that I instinctively skirted around, sticking to the shadows between. People passed me, unaware that the darkness behind me wasn't just absence of light, but something with intent, with hunger. The convenience store was brightly lit, making my skin prickle with discomfort that wasn't entirely my own. I felt the shadow retreat, pressing closer to my feet, almost hiding beneath me. I grabbed milk, some microwave meals, and a 6-pack of beer. The cashier tried to make small talk, but I kept my responses brief. I couldn't risk relationships anymore. On my way home, a woman walked toward me on the same side of the street. As she got closer, I felt my shadow stir, spreading outward just slightly. A surge of protectiveness that wasn't mine washed over me. "Cross the street," I whispered under my breath. "Just go." I stepped aside, giving her plenty of room to pass. She smiled politely and continued on her way, never knowing how close she'd come to something beyond her understanding. This had been our agreement. The shadow and I. It would no longer hurt people, and in return, I would feed its need for darkness, for solitude. Back in my apartment, I put away my groceries and settled on the couch with a beer. The television provided background noise as I thought about what had happened in the depths of the Mariana Trench. I wondered if the company had sent another vessel down, if they'd found anything else. If they had, they weren't sharing that information with me. I'd pieced together bits of understanding about my companion over these months. It communicated through emotions and images, pushing concepts into my mind when it needed to. It had been trapped for eons beneath the rock and sediment, dormant until our sonic pulses fractured its prison. It was ancient, predating human existence, and it was not alone. That thought kept me awake most nights. Were there more of them down there, waiting to be freed? The ocean floor was largely unexplored, with countless secrets buried in the crushing depths. Our expedition had awakened one. How many others might still sleep? My shadow stirred against the wall, responding to my unease. I took a deep breath and calmed my thoughts. It was sensitive to my emotions, and anxiety made it restless. "Sorry," I muttered. "Just thinking too much." I finished my beer and headed to the bedroom. The clock read 11:15. Another day gone, another night to face the darkness that was both around and within me. I undressed and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. When it did, I often woke to find my shadow stretched across the room, watching over me in its own alien way. Sometimes I caught glimpses of its dreams, vast, lightless spaces, crushing pressure, and a sense of connection to something larger, something collective. Those nights I woke gasping, the border between its mind and mine temporarily blurred. I reached for the bedside lamp, the last light still burning in my room. "We survived," I whispered to the darkness as I turned it off. "And that's enough for now." In the blackness, my shadow rippled across the bedroom wall, a silent companion in my now solitary existence.